Hell no, to the no, no, no. Hell to the no, hell to the no, to the no, no, no. Hell no, no.
Welcome into the 615 Sessions podcast on this beautiful Friday, March the 14th. We're happy to have you here in sunny, scenic Nashville, Tennessee. It is a great day in the Music City because I believe, as we sit here today, and it's just going to be you and me this afternoon on the 615 Sessions podcast. Thanks for dropping in and hanging out. It's a good day because you've gone through free agency so far for the Tennessee Titans. And while it may not be the greatest rush and you may not get the best grades or get the most praise or any of these things, winners and losers of free agency, you may not get any of the instantaneous satisfaction that you got, for example, last year when you signed a bunch of big name players, when you traded for your biggest ticket item last year in L'Jarius Sneed. And a lot of people looked around and said, hey, the Tennessee Titans in 2024, what are they doing here? What's the vibes? What is the goal? What is the objective of all the moves that they made last year? The objective, we understand, was to be meaningfully competitive. And ultimately, it did not end up working out in their favor. Now, you're looking at a free agency situation where, for the Titans in particular, it has one main theme that I think is putting us on a dead set course, just a gut feeling, but on a dead set course towards Cam Ward being the number one overall pick at quarterback. We're so happy to have you guys in for another episode of the 615 Sessions podcast that we do right here for A to Z Sports each and every, well, I wouldn't say each and every Friday. We take 2 weeks off after the end of the season. But for the most part, 50 Fridays out of the year, we're here hanging out for you. And it's always good to have you as a part of the conversation on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, if that's where you're live streaming the podcast today. If you're listening after the fact, we do appreciate you guys listening on demand there in the A to Z Sports Podcast Network. It's been a crazy week in the league, but it's not necessarily been crazy for the Tennessee Titans. And I think that's okay. I think that's just fine. I honestly think that the course that they have put themselves on is the best case scenario for where they're at right now. What they do come September, October, November, December, of course, that remains to be seen. We're not going to get too far ahead of ourselves. But based on what they've said about how they want to put this roster together under Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi and the moves that they've made in the last couple of days, it clearly at least is sticking to the plan that they've articulated. And I think that's the most important thing based on where they are right now. So we're going to go through the free agent moves today. I'm going to tell you who I think had the best NFL offseason, and I'm going to tell you who I think had the worst NFL offseason. I'm going to save you some grades, but just going through some personnel moves and some things that I had some questions about. And, you know, as we go live here on Friday, March the 14th at 2:20 p.m., just about, of course, things are always subject to change. So we will keep an eye on any continued updates, like, for example, the Vikings signing defensive lineman Jerry Tillery to a one-year deal. That just happened about 5 minutes ago since we started the podcast. So those moves will continue to trickle in. But for the most part, you know what your free agency class is going to look like. And like I said, there's one big theme. So as you guys hop in here, if you're hanging out on any of the live streaming broadcast channels, throw a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, retweet it, or share it. However it is that you feel so inclined to go about that, and we'll dive into the subject matter together. Have to remind you, of course, that the 615 Session podcast is made possible by Zen Sports, where you can go to bet on all your favorite major sports. In fact, conference tournament action for the Tennessee Vols is getting ready to tip off here in just a few moments from now, which we're all very excited about. That's why I wanted to squeeze in a podcast before we dropped in on this Tennessee-Texas game, because I know once you guys get that going, there would be no stealing your attention back as Auburn survives an Ole Miss team, 62-57, came down to the wire. Been a lot of fun to watch the SEC tournament. I've been hanging out there. So anyway, if you're betting basketball, bet at Zen Sports. Promo code ATOZTN gets you in on all the action. Terms and conditions do apply. Gambling problem must be gambling problem. Call 1-800-889-9789. Must be 21 plus and in the state of Tennessee to bet at Zen Sports. So my theory here, and it's just a working theory, but where we're at right now is that the moves that the Titans have made in free agency are putting them on a direct course to drafting a franchise quarterback at the end of April. That was a long time between March the 14th and when the NFL draft, the first round of the NFL draft goes down. But there's three directions that I think this thing could go. And the most likely direction is drafting a franchise quarterback a la Cam Ward, who we all look at. I think for the most part, I think, there may be a few dissenting opinions here or there, but for the most part, I think we are almost all in agreement on Cam Ward being the best quarterback in the upcoming draft class. So let's recap the Titans free agency first and foremost. What they did leading up to this is they released Harold Landry, who of course signed with the New England Patriots. We've probably talked about that at some point, if not on the podcast, certainly on the radio show. Throughout the course of the week, they re-signed Sebastian Joseph Day. They re-signed Mike Brown. They re-signed Darrell Baker Jr. So defensive line, safety, and corner also coming back. They parted ways with Harold Landry. Nick Westbrook-Akina was offered a contract here, but decided that he would like to go and pursue other opportunities and signed a deal with Miami. They tried to retain Mason Rudolph, and he was also not interested in coming back to Tennessee, and he signed a contract in Pittsburgh. They let go of Ryan Stonehouse, which is a bit of a surprise just because of what trajectory you thought Stonehouse might be on. But it's crazy. And, Titans fans have a particular love for punters. In fact, I ran into Brett Kern at the concourse at Bridgestone Arena today. Earlier this afternoon, him and his daughter were there to take in the Vols game that's getting ready to tip off in just about 7 minutes from now. And I promise we'll get you out in time so that you can enjoy the Tennessee basketball game as they warm up at Bridgestone Arena, just less than a mile from where we broadcasted from the palatial Rising Estate. But they let go of Ryan Stonehouse, and I think that shocked a lot of people just because he's a fan favorite. And once you started to take a look at the numbers, and I thought this was a pretty interesting tweet from an account on Twitter called @JakeAndBall, where it was pointed out that Ryan Stonehouse has had a pretty significant drop-off in terms of what you're looking for out of this punter or out of the punting situation, because he's a really talented player and he's got a hell of a leg. But the directional kicking stuff is something that he struggled with, and that, of course, was the best thing that Brett Kern brought to the table, is that he was able to coffin corner you at any given point and pin you down basically inside of your own 20 or back, and really made hay in that direction. I think that when you look at some of the numbers on Ryan Stonehouse, it may be surprising to you to see how much of a dip he has had in that production, but he'll probably go on to get other opportunities, and we don't have to spend too much time on a punter. But if you go to @JakeAndBall on Twitter, I thought you might have to scroll a couple of days because that was a couple of days ago, but you'll find some interesting numbers there on just where specifically Stonehouse took a dip and why it made sense to move on. And they brought in a 4-time All-Pro in Johnny Hekker, who's indisputably, it's a 1-year deal, and he's 34 years old, if I'm not mistaken, on Johnny Hekker, but that's an upgrade at the punter. So they bring in a new punter. They signed Dan Moore. That's their biggest ticket acquisition this year. 4 years, $82 million for the left tackle out of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh had a bit of a redundancy there. They drafted Troy Fautano in the first round last year. He was injured. They also drafted Broderick Jones a couple of years ago in the first round, and they have options there at left tackle without giving somebody like Dan Moore $82 million, and the Titans need solid left tackle play. My initial reaction was, buh. I mean, this is a player who has had an interesting career and who might have put themselves in a position, earlier than this past season to be able to capitalize, but it really hadn't gone his way. He hadn't performed up to any level of expectation, and at best he had been an average player. And I would argue that at best last year, his best season, that it was an average player. But shit, guys, You think about the level of left tackle play that you've had in the last couple of years. The more that you think about it, because now it bumps J.C. Latham over the right tackle, as I'm sure we've talked about, or as I'm sure you've thought about at some point in the week. That has been this legal tampering free agency period. If the contract solves two positions with one deal, I'm in a better place with it today than I was on, I think Monday is when that transaction came down. And that's all well and good. So you put yourself in that spot with the left tackle, who arguably may be the worst player on that offensive line, because they also signed Kevin Zeitler, the right guard, really successful for a long time right guard from most recently the Detroit Lions, to come in here and play right guard. So now your offensive line, Dan Moore, Peter Skoronski, whenever he gets back, Lloyd Cushenberry, Kevin Zeitler, and J.C. Latham. That's a much more promising group, a much more effective group. Again, on paper, these things have to coalesce, and it's not just, snap of the fingers. All right, you've got a better offensive line. They'll need to play together. They'll need to have that time spent, those reps together, to kind of learn each other's rhythms and motions and understand the language of the offense for those of them who are coming in. And obviously, JC just spent a whole year on the left side, so is it going to be much of a transition for him to go back to right, where, of course, he played in college at Alabama? Who's to say? So I'm not saying it's going to be seamless, but if it's solid, it's better. The mantra for this season, for me, is solid, not sucks. The Titans have sucked for a long time. Now they're working their way back up, at least in 2025, to solid. What they do at quarterback, obviously, has the potential to upend some of this. But if the worst player on your offensive line is the left tackle that you just signed, and he's a solid player, then you feel at least better about what Mike Borgonzi has talked about basically since he got the job. And I'm sure this was a core principle to him coming out of the Kansas City organization for 16 years is how long he spent. You're looking at a situation where he's talked about building through the trenches, and now he's showing you how he plans to build through the trenches. Doesn't mean that he can't fortify it in the draft as well, because they currently sit with 8 draft picks ahead of the 2025 NFL draft, and there's some interior offensive linemen that could, potentially be your guard next year, given that Kevin Zeitler's on a 1-year deal. Gabriel Pilcher says, listen, I would just be happy on YouTube, where you can interact in the comment section, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, if you're live streaming with us this afternoon. He says, listen, I would just be happy if we could have a league average offensive line. They have to at least have a league average offensive line in 2025, or this will be a failure. It'll be a failure on Bill Callahan. It'll be a failure on Brian Callahan, be a failure on Mike Borgonzi, Chad Brinker, and everybody else that's been involved with this. For 4 years, $82 million, I get that's just what a tackle costs in free agency. That's the 8th highest paid tackle on an average annual basis. So it's not even like major money. It's not like you paid top of market for Dan Moore, but they got to be at least league average, top 16. And that would be a substantial improvement, because they went from the worst in 2023 to bottom 3 in 2024. And now you can get into the top half of the league in 2025. You'd feel better about that trajectory for the players that they have drafted in the first round on that offensive line, and now the draft capital that they've spent on that offensive line. And also a change at quarterback could help, because we understand that Will Levis was inviting sacks and making that offensive line's job harder than it might be if you had, again, league average quarterback play, which of course you also did not have in 2025. So the Dan Moore signing, that's your biggest ticket item. And while it may have been a bit of sticker shock, and you're like, who? Which is the reaction of most people in the league, it makes sense. Cody Barton, 3 years, $21 million. They trade away Kenneth Murray to bring Barton into their linebacker core, and now they're gambling pretty heavy on a lot of these young players. James Williams, Cedric Gray. Doesn't mean that they can't continue to add players, but they also did not retain Jack Gibbons, so he's not an option. Otis Reese was retained, and I'd be curious to see how they envision his role, because I think Reese and Williams in particular, Gray wasn't really a factor as a 4th-round pick last year. Perhaps there's more there, because his entire season was robbed due to injury. And then when he got out there, he was terrible on special teams. And then when he got out there on defense against the Colts, it was even worse. Doesn't mean that's who he's going to be his entire career, but the early returns were not great. So they bring in Cody Barton, who's a solid player, finds the football, triple-digit tackles year over year in his time with the Denver Broncos. I mentioned Zeitler. One of my favorite deals, if not my favorite deal, is the former Carolina Panthers safety Xavier Woods, who comes in here on a 2-year, $10 million deal. Amani Hooker, Xavier Woods, and Mike Brown, it's a pretty solid trio. Not the best trio, but it's solid. And you're just trying to solidify your back end. Now, of course, Snead and Awuzie have to pay dividends at some point. And last year they were basically non-factors. So we'll see where they're at health-wise coming into 2025. But they are very critical pieces that you hinge upon. You know, you have Jarvis Brownlee, who played good football for you last year as a fifth-round rookie. And as I mentioned earlier, they re-signed Darrell Baker Jr., the other corner who played a good deal of snaps. Roger McCreary's still under contract, so I feel pretty good about the Titans secondary. My least favorite deal is the Van Jefferson deal. 1 year up to $2.5 million. It's pennies on the dollars. Clearly, basically, based on that contract, they don't expect much from him. But the Titans still need a wide receiver in free agency. They still need to draft a wide receiver. Right now, the wide receiver room is Calvin Ridley, Van Jefferson, Traylon Burks, Bryce Oliver, Mason Kinsey is here under contract. Jaquan Jackson, who was a healthy scratch because of his special teams issues last year. It's just, I think Tay Martin is still wandering around in the wide receiver room in some form or fashion. So that's probably their worst position group right now as we sit here today. You could argue linebacker, or you could argue that wide receiver at this point. It's not a lot of money. If it doesn't end up working out, I guess it's not the end of the world. But the player, it makes sense for the player because he's from Nashville or the greater Nashville area. And he's towards the end of his career, it would seem. And his best football is behind him. And he didn't have a good year last year in Pittsburgh. For him, it makes sense. For the Titans, it's kind of like, okay, whatever. Let's see what else they bring in. They also added a swing tackle guard in Blake Hance on a 1-year deal. And that's what the free agent class looks like right now, including Brandon Allen, the backup quarterback, which is the biggest reason why it feels like you are trending in the direction of Cam Ward as the number 1 overall pick. Now, I have no doubt that Cam Ward is going to be the number 1 overall pick. The only question that's left to answer is, are the Titans going to pick number 1 overall? Or are they going to trade it? It's reasonable to expect that Cleveland might want to try and come up. It's reasonable to expect that the New York Giants, who are in Aaron Rodgers hell right now, might want to come up. If the Titans do this and don't draft Cam Ward, I wouldn't blame a single one of you if you didn't watch a single one of their games or go to a single one of their games or check out on them completely in 2025, because it would be a slap in the face of the fan base. Based on the free agents that they've signed, they don't absolutely 100% have to draft Cam Ward, but they better draft Cam Ward if this is the tact that they're going to take, or the tact that they're going to take through free agency, because the biggest quarterback addition that you make with Will Levis, the only player prior to that under contract on this roster, you better be drafting Cam Ward. Anything less, even if it's Jackson Dart later in a trade back, or even Shador if you traded back, like Cam Ward is the best chance that you have to find a franchise quarterback in this draft. Doesn't mean that the rest of them can't have successful NFL careers, but based on the talent, Cam Ward is clearly and obviously QB1. So they can't go through this free agency process and not draft Cam Ward and expect you guys to give a single solitary damn about what they're going to do in 2025, because they would essentially be punting on a year. Jake Locker's Burner, which is funny YouTube name, says, trade, please. Eric Valls wants them to trade a pick. Dax Thompson says, trade back and punt the season. Why? For what? Why wouldn't you just get started with your franchise quarterback this year if he's there? There's no doubt in my mind that Cam Ward is worthy of the number 1 overall pick. Mike McCown says, honestly, what's the biggest difference between Ward and Sanders? Talent. Indisputably, more talented player. Cam Ward is the better athlete. Cam Ward has the more live arm. Cam Ward can make throws from arm angles that I don't even think were possible prior to guys like Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. Now, some things that Cam Ward does that you don't love, they're not a single throw that he doesn't think he can make, and he's going to take that chance. But at that point, wouldn't you rather have a quarterback who's more gung-ho that way? And I know Levis kind of had some similar traits, but they're not the same player. Cam Ward was an infinitely better college football quarterback, and Will Levis had some doubts about him coming out of the college process, and plenty of people who watch Will Levis in college said, yeah, I'm not shocked at all that person is not going to be a good professional quarterback. But the biggest difference is clear and obvious talent. Shador is a better pocket passer. But to be a better pocket passer isn't necessarily the best trade if you don't have plus mobility, because you're going to have mobility in the NFL to play at a reasonably high level. These pass rushers are more athletic. Hell, they're more athletic than some of the quarterbacks, than most of the quarterbacks, I might argue. You have to be able to move. Shedeur, he's not like a total stiff. He's not Joe Flacco or Stafford back there, but he doesn't move nearly as well. I think that when you look at what the Titans, Jake Locker's burner again asks, where would Ward rank in quarterbacks next draft? I don't give a shit about next draft. You have this draft. I don't even know who's coming out in next year's draft yet. You don't know who's coming out in next year's draft yet. You have no idea what the college football season in 2025 is going to look like before they get to the NFL draft. That's the shit I hate. And I'm not just beating up on that account because they're the one that said it and it happened to catch my attention. But like, I don't give a shit where he'd rank in next year's draft or last year's draft. I care where they are picking in 2025 and what is on the table. And what is on the table for them is a franchise quarterback. So draft him or risk losing your fan base. What's left of it? I mean, this fan base is in tatters already. It's not just that the Titans suck. It's Mike Keith's gone. Their best ambassador of the fan base is going to do games in Knoxville on Saturdays instead of at Nissan on Sundays. It's one of my least favorite things to say, where would he rank in among quarterbacks in next year's draft? You have no. Spencer Rattler was a consensus number 1 overall pick until he wasn't, until he got benched at Oklahoma that college football season, until he transferred to South Carolina, until he basically collapsed as a prospect and ended up going from the consensus first overall pick to 5th rounder in last year's draft and benched by the New Orleans Saints. Stop it. It's not. Carson Beck, Ryan brings up. So was Carson Beck, a consensus number 1 overall pick. If he goes back to Georgia, there's no doubt. And then he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't good. And Georgia receivers also had a bunch of drops problems that I think contributed to Carson Beck's issues. But you went through that season and realized, oh no, there are better players out there than Carson Beck. You keep an open mind every year. You don't try and do, well, he wouldn't even be as good as Bo Nix or Michael Penix last year, who went 8 and 12 in last year's first round. That's not important. That draft has already happened. This is this year's draft. That's what you've got ahead of you. Focus on that, not where you would take your, Ryan says it the way, and Pistol Grip says it as well. If he's your guy, and we don't know. That's the biggest unknown here, because they could totally, again, I think it would be a slap in the face to the fan base if they did not draft Cam Ward. But if he's not the number 1 player on their board, and Abdul Carter is, and depending on how much further Cam Ward is down their draft board, if he's further down on their draft board, the only justification would be, but he was our 7th best prospect. You get the number 1 overall pick. You don't spend it on the 7th best prospect. You get the best player in the draft. So that I wouldn't like it. I already think it's going to be a tough season coming up, whether they draft Cam Ward or not, and that's just growing pains, right? They got a bunch of different things that they got to work out here in the next couple of months. But if he's not the number 1 quarterback to you in to you in the draft, then what the hell did you just do in free agency? Because Brandon Allen is not a starting quarterback, even though he started the game last year. It's just not what it is. So take your guy, and if he's not your guy, then take the guy who is. But be prepared to live with your decision that way. And Mike Borgonzi's got to be comfortable tying himself to a quarterback in year 1, which is no small thing. If you are a first-year general manager in a place that has at least track record of impatience, even if now they're all of a sudden preaching patience over panic and all this shit. Okay, well, you better draft that quarterback or your fan base isn't going to panic. They're not going to panic. They're going to quit on you, and they'll riot, and then they'll quit on you. You can't work that way at this point. Dax says, I will speak for the trade back crowd, which is fine. When I say we as fans are tired of reaching for bad quarterbacks and finding ourselves in this situation every other year. You keep drafting quarterbacks until you hit on one. That's just what it is. That's life in the NFL. You traded up for Will Levis. Okay, it didn't work. Take another one. You take Cam Ward number 1 overall. All right, maybe it doesn't work out. Go get another one. You sign a free agent after that, and it's Ryan Tannehill, and he has a ceiling, or like Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, the Ryan Tannehill experience has already happened, but you go through these cycles. One team wins the Super Bowl every year. and it's usually the team that's the healthiest. It's not even the team with the best players. It's the team that's the healthiest, because rosters at the start of the year look much different than they do by the end of the year. So you're working against a couple of different factors. It's very, very difficult to do. The draft process is an imperfect science. Quarterback draft in particular is basically a coin flip. So you just, like, I get it that you're tired of it, but you just keep doing it. I mean, it's not like you just throw your hands up in the air and say, all right, no more football. No. Keep doing it until you get it right, or as right as humanly possible. And even that might not be enough to win you a Super Bowl, right? Because then there's luck involved, there's health involved, there's all these different things. So I am looking at this situation and saying, I understand that Titans fans have fatigue, specifically about the quarterback position, because it's been McNair and it's been Tannehill and Marcus for, a couple of seasons where you thought, maybe just. Beyond that, it's been shit. And I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. There's just some level of, you might just have to eat it. You might just have to eat it until you get good. And that's kind of where I'm at with the Titans right now. You're going to have to eat your vegetables before you get to dessert. And the Titans have been, binging on Uber Eats delivery, like Calvin Ridley and Kenneth Murray and L'Jarius Sneed and flashy sugar rush type of trades and acquisitions for what? To be the worst team in football, to win 3 less games than they did when they went 6-11, and that wasn't good enough. And then fired a general manager. It's tough, but you're just going to have to keep doing it, because that's the life cycle in the NFL. And I don't mean to hit you with tough shit, but kind of tough shit. So we'll see what happens. We're going to have press conferences probably at some point next week. I had talked with Titans PR today about the potential for press conferences today. Doesn't sound like that was possible. So we will expect to hear from at least some of the Titans' new players next week, one would hope, in a press conference setting. And we will look forward to that. Obviously, we'll be able to report on that. We're going to have Nate Tice on the radio show next week. We're also going to have Dan Orlovsky. We're planning to have Dan. We're going to work with Dan's schedule as best we can to talk a lot about these quarterbacks, because Nate wrote a great piece on Yahoo about Cam Ward. Orlovsky is stumping now for Cam Ward as the number 1 overall pick, comparing him to Steve McNair, which I honestly wish Dan wouldn't do, because I don't think you should do that for a player before he's taken a snap in the NFL. But I get it. I get the comparison. I see what Dan sees. Well, Dan's much smarter than me about quarterback evaluation, so I'm not going to say that I see what Dan sees. But I see Dan's point in basically the style of play versus what McNair brought to the table. I get what he's doing there. And it's not just, black quarterback X, black quarterback Y. Okay, Steve McNair, Tennessee Titans. No, that's not what this is. There are stylistic things about Cam Ward and McNair that I get the comp, even if I wish they wouldn't make that specific comp, right? So we will see. Jake Locker's burner says generational. He means generational talent. Don't forget. Yeah, I don't give a shit about that either. There's no such thing. I mean, well, there is. Cam Ward is a generational not Cam Ward. Travis Hunter is a generational player. I don't know, because we've never seen anything like him in college football. But he's the only one, and that doesn't mean that the Titans should draft him. There's not a 0% chance, because there's always a chance, but there's a 0.00001% chance that the Titans draft Cam Ward as the best corner. I don't think there's ever been a corner that's gone number 1 overall. So if the Titans do draft Travis Hunter, it's because they're not picking first overall. And also, that's one of the worst things that Chad Brinker could have said into a microphone. And he said it on my radio station, and I wish he wouldn't do it. Just because they are generational college football players does not make them generational NFL players. That's just not what it is. Patrick Mahomes is a generational NFL player. He was not a generational college football player. So these things, I wish that people would not use the G word, because it's not a real thing, or at least it needs to be used a hell of a lot less. All right. That's going to do it for us today on the 615 Sessions podcast. Thanks for stopping by. It's rare that we get to do these solo pods from time to time, but I think we got a lot of good things that we talked about. Radio show was a lot of fun this week. You can go check out interviews with Charles Davis that we did earlier in the week. Obviously, the basketball has been going on, so we've spent a lot of time down at Bridgestone Arena talking Vols and Auburn, who got a win today. Vols getting ready to tip off, so I'll let you guys get out of here so you can watch your basketball team. And I will see you, Sunday night. Yeah, we'll do a primetime show Sunday night right here on the A to Z Sports streaming network. Have a great rest of your afternoon.